my channel.
Make sure to click it off people when they're talking to you.
Okay, it says we're live. I'm just waiting for it to update here.
Yep, you're live.
Okay, so I'll just give everyone a minute to pop on and make sure everything is going well. Okay. Welcome everybody who's on already.
Hello.
We are going to be talking about orchards.
Yay.
Fun topic. Excuse me. Okay, well, we have 7 people on, so 7 of you can hear the very beginning introductions, and those who don't get them can go back and watch later. But I wanted to have everyone introduce themselves for those of you who don't know everybody on this little Google Hangout live. And I guess I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Jennifer, and my husband Chris, he's over there. He's helping moderate this. And we are at the Sunshine Farm. We're a little plant-based homestead in upstate New York, and we are starting an orchard this year. So that is why this topic is so interesting to me. And I'm excited to share what we're doing with you and to learn from all of you. And Morgan.
Sure, and I'm Morgan Gold from Goldshaw Farm. My wife Allison and I, we have about a 160-acre farm here in northern Vermont. And on our farm, one of the first things that we did was we actually planted a 600 plus tree permaculture orchard, which includes a combination of chestnuts, hazelnuts, mulberries, elderberries, apple, black locust, a whole bunch of other stuff too. And so, yeah, happy to talk about trees today. It's like one of my favorite topics on the face of the earth.
Excellent. I'm Rose, Wholesome Roots, and we started our orchard like 4 years ago when we moved in here, without having a real good permaculture plan in mind yet for the property. So it was kind of a mistake that we're learning from, and now we're moving it to our current vegetable garden location to create a food forest. So whatever trees survived the deer damage down in the other orchard area are going to be moved up. And so those are some pears, apples, cherries. I'm not going to move the pawpaw that are down there just because pawpaw have a taproot and they probably wouldn't survive, and they are alive and the deer don't eat them. So I'm going to leave them. And then we have added in the fall, we added boysenberry, mulberry, several other small shrubs into our vegetable garden just to get them started. And so then the edge of the vegetable garden will become the rest of the food forest. And we've got tons of cuttings and seeds that we've started this spring that's going to be added to that as well. And we're going to incorporate other plants like comfrey and pollinators and other things that help the trees as well.
Awesome. And basically I was, Monday I ordered the trees, and then I was like, okay, maybe I'll talk about that in the live on Thursday. And then I was thinking, I don't really know anything about it, so I probably shouldn't be talking about this subject to people. So I was like, you know what? I know a couple people who really know a lot about this and who are also learning and experimenting and just excited about this topic. So I thought it would be a fun idea to bring people together to share their experience. Welcome, Orchard Dreams. Yes, so many orchard dreams. I'm just reading the live chat.
Hi, Carla. Sorry.
Thanks for joining. You're fine. So, Morgan, your orchard. What do you have going on in your orchard?
So our orchard, it's actually it's about a 6.5 acre area that's on the slope of a hill. One of the things that I noticed when we first got our property was that, you know, things were starting to erode. There was a ton of flooding down at the bottom of the hill. And so the plan that I devised was to try to create this giant silvopasture / orchard, which would mix a whole bunch of different types of trees. And at the same time be able to have grazing happen within the alleys between the trees. And so let's see, it was about I guess it was the spring of 2017, I started the process where what we did was we actually dug about 6,000 feet of swales and berms. And for you guys who don't know this, swales and berms, those are sort of the ditches, and then the berm is the hump that catches water. The idea being that these trenches would essentially serve as part of the irrigation for the trees, because I don't run any water out to the trees. I don't do anything like that. Since we're up here in Vermont, we actually have a lot of rainfall. So water hasn't been a huge problem, but we wanted to give our trees the best advantage. And so we dug these trenches first, and that was the first thing we did. Then the next thing I did was I built this pretty integrated planting plan. There's a guy up in Montreal, or just outside of Montreal, by the name of Stefan Subkowiak. And he has this philosophy known as the Permaculture Orchard. And his principle is that you're essentially interplanting all of your trees in specific patterns, so that they're both providing nutrients and helping each other, as well as breaking up certain cultivars and certain types of plants so that they aren't becoming places for pests and disease to really spread. And so each of our tree rows, and we have, let's see, about 12 currently in action, different tree rows all the way up the hill. And each tree row has a specific pattern. So for example, one row is chestnut, black locust, apple. And then it'll go chestnut, black locust, apple all the way down, and it'll repeat, maybe 30 times all the way down one row. And what that does is the chestnut is close enough to other chestnuts, but not so close. The black locust becomes a nitrogen fixer and sits in between those. And then you have the apple, which also sort of is able to play off of that. And so you never have two chestnuts next to each other. You never have two apples next to each other. You always have a black locust in between them when you use a planting pattern like this. And so each of our rows has one of those mixed patterns all the way up it. And we've also started to plant in other things now as we're 2 years into this experiment. So for example, most of the rows have comfrey running through them, starting to add some other things as well. One of the biggest problems I'm having is mowing and maintaining, because everything is dug on contour. So it follows sort of the moves of the land, and that makes it very hard. It makes it very curvy, but then it also makes it very hard to mow and keep things nice and trim. And mowing and maintenance is probably the biggest thing and most important thing you should be doing for your orchard, because that's how you prevent the rodents and other pests from really getting in there. And so that's been probably the hardest thing we've had.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So what was the name of the resource that you found when you were looking at that?
Oh yeah, so the guy you should look up, Stefan Subkowiak, and probably murder it if I spell it right now, but like Sobkiak or something like that. His place is called Miracle Farms. It's up in Quebec. And if you look for Permaculture Orchard and Miracle Farms, it'll come up. I think he's got a YouTube channel. He has some great instructional materials too. And he's just been an awesome resource for me as I've been trying to do this stuff over the last couple of years.
If any of the moderators can find that and link it, that would be super awesome. If not, it's fine. But Chris is working on it, so that sounds really cool. I'm taking notes because I'm like, I need to remember this, and I don't want to have to rewatch this video to find the information. So that was really cool. How did you choose which order to do things in? From that guy?
It was sort of a mix of things. Some of those principles of different types of trees that you want to mix. So like mixing like a palm tree, like an apple, with a nut tree like a chestnut is something that I try to do. So for example, I've got butternut, which is sort of a rarer tree that is very common, or was very common up here in the Northeast, and is not that common anymore. That's one of the trees that I have interplanted in there, but it's not that far related from the chestnut. And so I try to spread the chestnuts and the butternuts out, for example. But basically it was just this idea of having 3 types of tree per each row, and then establishing a specific type of pattern all the way down the row. And so, for example, I have rows that are mulberry, black locust, apple, or, elderberry, black locust, butternut, or apple, comfrey, mulberry. And they can all go down though. Each row that I have is actually different. Part of the reason I'm doing that is just a little bit trial and error. I want to see what works and what doesn't work. Part of the reason I've planted so many trees, and if you actually look at the planting distances, they're only about 10 feet apart per tree. And the reason for that too is I want to be able to thin them out. And when you're planting trees and you're managing an orchard and trying to keep stuff in check like that, your biggest enemy is time. In that, perennial tree crops take a long time to get established. Yet once they do, they pay a ton of dividends. And so you don't want to plant things at your perfect planting distance and find out 5 years from now that one tree is just not nearly the right, variety for whatever your soil condition is, or for a host of other reasons. And then you're left having to start all over again, versus finding that one of them works, one of them doesn't, one of them is more successful. So you can just cut out the less successful tree and move on. And so that's been a big part of why, I planted way more trees than I needed. I'm continually sprouting trees right now. So I've got several hundred apple trees, chestnut trees, and black locust trees sprouting here on our farm, so that I can have bare root seedlings by the end of this fall, that for trees that didn't make it or trees that are struggling, I can just immediately just start replanting them versus waiting.
For us, obviously. I mean, I'm going to visit you guys and take some trees home with me.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, that'll be the thing too. If anybody wants to be in the Vermont area in the fall, I'm going to have way more wild apple trees than I need, way more chestnut trees, and way more black locust, especially black locust.
How did you pick those trees, Morgan? How did you pick, like you said, butternut, you talked about black locust. Like, I don't even know what those are. How in the world did you decide to plant those? As I had this kind of concocted dream of wanting to start a farm in Vermont, tree crops were one of the first things I really got into as an idea, just because I like the principle of trying to establish something and then having this, essentially an ongoing food annuity that keeps paying you year after year after year. And, if you look at most permaculture design courses or sustainable agriculture kind of thought theory, so much of it's rooted in leveraging tree crops. And so that's what got me down this path. And then, reading folks like Mark Shepard, seeing folks like Kiva Silver, and like really kind of following these types of people who are like the tree people. that was where I learned so much of it. And that's where you learn that like the chestnut is just this awesome tree that, was so prevalent here in North America 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and it since has been pretty much almost completely obliterated. But it has a lot of value. You learn about trees like black locust, which is a nitrogen fixer. It can be forage for animals. It has a really great wood that is more rot resistant than cedar, and it's fast growing. And so it has so many great uses. Yet, people sometimes fear it because it can be a little bit invasive, or they hate it because it's got thorns. But once you start to learn the value of these trees, you can start to kind of take the different trees and plan out like what sort of things do you want to build for the future, and you can use the trees as a resource there. So you have some trees for wood purposes, just the wood itself?
Yeah, I mean, black locust, we probably have, I'm going to say about 200 black locust trees right now planted. Wow. And it's going to be a mix of use of timber, use for animal forage. It's great for pollinators. The bees absolutely love it. The flowers are crazy fragrant and awesome. And so that's great. But then also, if I ever need fencing, it just becomes ready built, and I can actually, with black locust, you can do something known as coppicing, which is where you cut the tree and you can actually sprout new trees from that stump. And, several years later, you can cut it again. And so you can kind of continually harvest from that as well. And so that's going to be a big part of the role that black locust has. And so, whether it's firewood or whether it's construction lumber or whether it's just, fence posts, it's just a great resource to have for the farm for decades to come.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Fence posts are expensive.
I have a question for you, Morgan. What made you choose the black locust in respects to other types of locusts like honey locust? Was there a reason why you chose the black locust?
I think it was, what I've read is that the black locust grows just a little bit faster. I'm not even 100% sure of that. That's like kind of what I've picked up over the years. So that was the biggest piece. And then it was, as I came time to source a lot of my tree seedlings, I found a really great source for the black locust and honey locust, especially up around here, looking for stuff that was, coming from this general area.
Yeah.
Harder to find honey locust. I mean, when I was in DC, like in Virginia, it's actually a lot easier to find.
Yeah, I was going to say honey locust is a lot more common down here. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, well, but I think that's like an important point that you're bringing up, Rose, for anybody who is trying to plant an orchard right now, and they might be hearing us talk and say, "Oh, wow, that sounds great. I should be doing chestnut or I should be doing butternut." But really, you've got to think about your context. You got to think about the climate you're in, what you're living in. Like I just heard you talk about having a pawpaw tree, and I'm so crazy jealous of that, because it's nearly impossible for us to maintain a pawpaw tree here.
Be able to. My mom grows them in Massachusetts.
Yeah, but we're 4A, so we're like 5 is usually what they say is sort of the edge for pawpaw.
Now I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, and so that's.
If you had a microclimate area, you might be able to get away with it, but
you might. But it's a lot more work. I'd much rather do something like apple trees, which are like weeds around here, or chestnut trees, which used to be so abundant here.
And I can hardly grow either of those here.
Right, exactly. You got to know your climate and your context.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because when I was looking for trees, what I was doing was trying to find things that were specifically created here. So like trees that were crossed here, or if not here, or an even more extreme climate that would be able to be okay here. So like things like were produced in Maine or Vermont were also ideal, because if they can handle those climates, I think they'll be fine here, and we get similar.
Yeah. Oh, like one of the nurseries I bought from is actually not too far from you, Jen, and so like.
What's it called?
Twisted Tree. Twisted Tree Nursery. They're in. Get the name of it. I can email it to you, but you can look up Twisted Tree. And the guy who runs it, Akiva Silver, he is like a tree genius. He's actually a guy who I've spent a lot of time with and learned a lot from, just in terms of trying to understand what to do on this front. And yeah, great resource. Probably about an hour or two from you, and definitely worth looking up.
Well, I guess I need to make a visit to Twisted Tree Nursery. So we're starting with about 20 trees, but they're not young trees. They're 3 or something years old, so 3 or 4 years old, not like babies.
Well, but that's an important thing too for people, right? Where if you think about it, what age you want your trees at will help give you a head start and get established. Yeah. I put most of my trees in, they were like 1 or 2 year old bare root seedlings. Mm-hmm. And, because I was doing it at such a scale that the cost difference where I was paying, $2 or $3 a tree to do it at that scale versus, $10 or $20, $30 for a tree at a 3-year-old level. That's a totally different ballgame that you're talking about. But, your trees are actually, if you're putting them in right now, about the same age as my trees.
Yeah, and for us, we don't know if we're going to be here for that long. Right now, we're thinking, 5 to 10 years, and so we might only be getting fruit for a couple of years, by the end of that range. But I wanted to do it anyways, because maybe we will be here for 15 years, and I didn't want to waste that time. So
yeah, I think planting the orchard right away is a very good key thing. I mean, not right away, maybe not the first year, because you kind of have to learn the lay of the land and where the deer go. But I think that was the one thing I regretted. I lived at a rental house for 6 years, and I could have planted as many fruit trees as I wanted to, but I thought I was moving in a year, and I didn't. And I'm like, oh, I would have had fruit. I would have had fruit after 6 years if I had planted when I moved in, So I think it's important to go ahead and get your trees planted and started, because you never know how long you're going to be somewhere, and somebody else can always benefit from that fruit after you're gone.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Oh, same zone. That's awesome. Wasteland Acres. Remind me where you are. I have such a hard time keeping track of everyone. But yeah, we're in 6A. We're in kind of a microclimate because of the way we're situated near the Great Lakes. If you look at the map, everywhere around us is 5, and even a little bit further into 4. But right where we are is 6A because of the Finger Lakes and the Great Lakes and the way it all affects our climate. And it doesn't really make a big difference between 6A and 5B, but I don't know, it makes me feel a little better.
So Carla had a question about some of my cuttings. I I had in the video, and how do I do the screen share now?
Yes.
And she asked if they were grown from just sticks. And yes, they are. So right here, you can see these are some cuttings that we're starting to help our fruit orchard.
It's the screen share is not showing up right now.
Is it not coming up?
No.
No, it's not screen sharing. I think you have to hit like accept or something.
Oh, sorry. I'm like pointing to them and talking about oh, you're right. It does. It's just making sure that.
There you go. Now I get to twice. And me.
Okay. So these are some cuttings that we've started. There's some blueberry back in the pinker stems. Those are blueberry, all just all different kinds of stuff. And their blueberries are leafing out already. We have some bay leaves in the back there, some Akiba here in the front that are blooming. It's just insane how quickly cuttings can grow. And our fig, sorry, that was kind of blurry on the leaf part, but the fig cuttings are doing really well too. So this is just an example of some of the things that we've been able to do just this spring to be able to get some really cheap, low cost, actually free for us. And we've also got seeds started for a bunch of different types of trees. We're going to be growing a ton more pawpaw. I'm really excited about
from you.
I'm really excited about the pawpaw. So yeah, that's going to be really nice, especially because we have the pond. It's going to be something that we can plant all the way around. They really like that moisture. And so it's going to be fruit that we'll have available that's really hard to find and come by. So I'm excited. And we've also got a lot of other blueberry seeds started. We've got goji. We talked about goji the other day. Black goji berry and red goji berry that we're starting from seed, and a lot of other smaller things. So my method is a little different than Morgan's in the respect that he's growing as a farm business type aspect, it seems like, where you want to make a profit. I mean, if you have that many trees, then that's not just for your own personal use, right?
Yeah.
For us, we're growing because I want to grow what my family loves to eat. I want to grow what my boys can go out and pick off of the bush when they're hungry. I wouldn't be like, I'm doing goat chores, go pick some blueberries, leave me alone. And so we're getting a lot of layers in our food forest. So for us, it's more about closer plantings because we don't have as much space as Morgan. And so we're planting things a lot closer, but we're planting them in relation to how they grow. So we have the different layers. So we have our big tall trees that are going to be like our pear and apple and peach and possibly locust. That's something I've been looking into. And for us down here, hazelnut and hickory are some of the nuts I've looked at just as a way to mix things up a little bit more. And then below that layer, we have the fig, the pawpaw. They're just slightly smaller, the elderberry. And then below that, we've got blueberry, mulberry, so, and even below that, we've got the more herbaceous plants that die and come back, or possibly even annual ones. And then on the ground level, we're going to have ground covers like alpine strawberry that are going to be growing all along throughout that area. And then we have the vines that climb up the trees, which are going to be like passion flower and things like that, so that we can have tons of different food. But then interplanting in amongst all of that, other plants that help support the community, like the comfrey, that's a bioaccumulator. So it sends down a really deep taproot and it pulls up the minerals from deep into the soil where most plants' roots can't go. And it pulls it up into the leaves, and we can chop and drop with the comfrey and fertilize that way, so that we're not having to bring in outside resources and we're able to just work with what we have here in our property.
Well, Rose, it's great that you bring up comfrey, because that is like another one of those plants where if anybody's out there like trying to figure out what they want to do for like starting their own home scale orchard, it's an easy thing to plant. It has so much value, to your point of being a bioaccumulator. the mulch you can make from it is just so nutrient dense for everything else around it. You can even feed it to your chickens and stuff. It's one of those things that people sometimes are scared of because there is a risk with it, which I'll mention in a minute. But I would call it out as one of those things that has a ton of value. So yeah.
Tell me more about that. So what kind of value does it bring? Because I never even heard of it until this live.
So like I said, it's to Rose's point, how it brings the nutrients up. You can cut it easily. It grows back really quickly. It's really hard to kill. And that value from the cuttings of the mulch is just super nutritious. And then it's good for, animal forage. They'll eat it too. And so like you could chop a whole bunch of it and feed it to your chickens
and goats.
And goats. Yeah. Sheep. And so it's got a lot of value there. The risk with it is this, it's hard to kill, and the root crown, the way it propagates is it spreads through the root crown, or it can spread through the root crown. And so, like for example, if you were to run a tiller through a comfrey plant, right, it would chop up a whole bunch of little pieces of comfrey, and it would go everywhere, and you would never be able to get rid of the comfrey ever. You'd have it forever. And so you have to just be careful. You have to be thoughtful about where you put it. But if you put it strategically in the right places, it's awesome.
Also, be sure you don't get the one that self-seeds. Yes. The self-seeding comfrey will take over, and it will drown out your other plants that you're trying to grow that are beneficial. So that's another thing to keep in mind with the comfrey, is to make sure you're getting, is it the Bocking 14? Is that the good one? I think. And it's also got medicinal uses. I think you might have mentioned that, but I just wanted to reiterate that it does have, some medicinal benefits. And so it's a good plant to have around all in all. Yeah. Natalie from Hey, It's a Good Life had a question. She said, what does that propagation process look like for you? Natalie, the cuttings are super easy. I have a video on the fig cuttings where I used willow bark tea to try to, increase the rooting chances of it. But really, they root so easy in a well-drained soil that it's a lot of these plants are very easily rooted. So for the ones that I'm starting that are smaller plants, they're not things that usually grow on a rootstock that's from a different variety, like apples require a rootstock. So that would be more where you would do the thing when you stick the thing. Morgan, help me here. When you take grafting, thank you.
You stick the thing in the hell, like, whoa,
it's live.
So if you're doing something like apple trees or peach trees and stuff like that, they grow better if you graft them onto a hardy rootstock and a good fruit producing branch. So you can do grafting with those. That would be better than just the plain cuttings. And then so many things will grow from seed. And Morgan mentioned that he's grown seeds of all of his different trees, even though he's not going to get the exact same apple out of his apple seed that he grew because he's not going to use the rootstock. You're probably still going to get some trees that are producing apples, and they're just not going to be the exact same thing. So it's worth it. Just go ahead and start some seeds and start some cuttings, because all in all, you're still going to end up with food. Now, if you're doing it for commercial reasons, you might want to be more narrow in your choices, but still, you're still going to get something with apples.
Well, the apples I have here, those are sort of like my lottery ticket. So this past fall, some friends and I, we took a couple of days, we made a ton of apple cider from wild apples. And when you're making the cider, you have a ton of pulp and it just all mashed up. And so, what we did was we took the pulp and spread it across just like basically a garden bed on our farm here. And we just have it sitting there right now. And my hope is that I sprout a whole bunch of stuff this spring. To Rose's point, though, none of that's going to be true to its parents. So the genetics of the apple tree are going to take on all sorts of weird and wild properties. But my plan is, I'm going to have little seedlings that I can either use just as rootstock, and it's a really cheap source for rootstock, or they might be my lottery ticket, because out of those, there's going to be maybe a couple of them that produce an interesting strain of apple.
Exactly.
And so, You know, that's how like the, you know, Pink Lady or, you know, Johnny Gold or any of those types came.
I think some of our friends over across the pond are doing a whole thing this winter with starting apple seeds. So I know Liz Zorab from By the Farms, she's doing it. And a couple of other UK YouTubers are also purposefully starting some apple seeds to see what you get. You might end up with an apple that far outcompetes all the ones on the market. So it's worth it.
Well, and one myth that I think is out there is, I'm sorry, what was that, Jen?
Just make sure you mark them really well so that you
yeah, no,
definitely.
but there is this myth that people say, oh, you know, you can't grow apples from seed because they're going to be horrible. But what a lot of people that I've talked to over the years have said is, you know, your odds of having a good apple that's either good for use in cider or vinegar or for eating, you know, you're probably about like 33, 40%, somewhere in that range. So most of them won't be great, but that's okay. And it's just about, you know, having a really cheap and efficient way to get a lot of good variety in terms of what sort of apples you might have.
Question. So crab apples or apples that are like really small, can that happen from like just planting random seeds, or is that specifically certain strains of something? Because
that's the origins of all apples. So yes, you could absolutely end up with a regular crab apple from planting the seed of a Honeycrisp.
Yeah, if anybody wants to go really crazy with the genetics of apples and understanding the origins and how they think they came out of like some valley in Turkey somewhere, is Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan. There is an entire chapter, like, you know, very long chapter about how apples originated and how they've been shaped by mankind over the years. And once you learn that, it will be one of those things that you read it and you'll be just so fascinated with the topic of apple genetics.
That's so interesting. And so, okay, so when you're talking about wild apples, do they have a certain, or is it just super diverse, just like you go into the grocery store and you pick from apples, or do they all kind of have a similar, like, are they all smaller? Are they, I'm just curious what you mean when you say wild apples.
I mean that they're not, you know, they're essentially apples that are grown from seed. So, you know, for example, every Macintosh apple that you are ever going to eat that's actually a Macintosh apple came from the same tree and was produced by grafting cyanwood from a parent tree to some rootstock. So you can't just, I only want to plant Macintosh. I saw somebody actually in the questions asked that they saw in a store like Home Depot somewhere, an apple tree that grew 4 different types of apples. And they're like, that can't be right. But that's actually fine, because essentially what they did was they probably just grafted 4 different types of apple to the same rootstock. And so you could easily have, I've seen trees that have like 6 types of apples and even a type of pear all to the same root.
That's actually what I'm growing.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I have a regular pear tree that has 5 different types of pears grafted onto it, but I don't think all 5 have made it. I think the deer ate it down to like 3. So, and I have an Asian pear tree that's the same. It was started out as 5 different types of Asian pears. I have a cherry tree that's the same, where it's 5 different types of cherry. And I have a, a fruit cocktail, which is all the different pit fruits. So it's got plums, nectarines, peaches, all on the same tree.
That's so funny, because right before you said that, Our Organic Life was like, I've heard of fruit cocktail trees. This is so crazy. Yeah, he said that right when she was
real, and it's all done by grafting. The beauty of grafting is your rootstock has to be strong and hardy, but you can graft different branches from different varieties all over the tree. And so, for me, wanting to grow in a small area but have a lot of variety, it worked out perfectly for picking that out. And I got all of those, the first round of trees that I got 4 years ago. Spent $650 at a farm called Ison's Farm, and they're located here in Georgia. So I was able to drive over to get them, but they do mail order too, and they have all the different dwarf varieties, and they also have all the different cocktail type varieties, and they are the best growers of muscadines for anybody interested in growing muscadine vines.
What's muscadine?
It is a type of grape that grows wild in the South.
Okay.
They're
Cool.
very good. Very good.
I feel like this world of permaculture orchard folks, we have our own vocabulary and language, and I'm just on the outside still learning it. So,
and what's really cool is muscadine's seeds contain the highest amount of natural resveratrol than any other plant. And resveratrol, if you don't know about it, is really good for you. It's really healthy. And it's one of the things that my naturopath actually recommends for my Hashimoto's. So I'm like, I'll just keep eating some muscadine seeds. They don't taste great, but
somebody asked.
Were you going to go to our organic lives question there?
Maybe.
The rootstock. So our organic life was asking about whether or not rootstock matters, and actually it does. So I believe rootstock will dictate a lot of things related to climate resiliency, as well as the timing of the harvest and sort of when everything goes. Like if you have a tree that has 5 different types of apples on it, I think the way that it all sort of fruits at the same time is because of the rootstock. So rootstock does matter a bit. But that said, the rootstock isn't going to necessarily dictate what type of fruit you get. And that's driven more by the cyanwood in terms of what's further out there.
Yeah, I've heard that too, especially for grapes. I know the rootstock in the Finger Lakes region where they grow a lot of grapes for wine. The rootstock, it's all about the rootstock and getting something that's really good for the climate. Which is another whole science experiment.
And I know a lot of us are not able to grow citrus because we're not far south enough. But I'm super excited because I actually got some hardy orange seed from Baker Creek. And it's one that will grow here. I'm not sure how far north it does grow, but for those of you that are kind of borderline, if you're zone 7 or around there, you might be able to grow the hardy orange. And it's not like a super delicious orange. It's more of a really sour, lemony, but it can be used in recipes and stuff like that to make really delicious salad dressing or marinade. So it's a fun one, and it works really well. It used to be used very, very frequently in Georgia as a hedgerow to prevent cattle from leaving their pasture, and they would plant it all the way around the pasture because it has big thorns, and it would actually keep them in.
Somebody asked if you can use honey instead of rooting hormone for cuttings. Anyone know?
I've not heard of that. I know
I have heard of it, but I've never done it.
Yeah, good question. I don't know if anyone knows or can find the answer to that. Put in the comments. Okay, so that's really, I feel like there's just so much to learn. It's like a constant learning experience. Yeah, that's a really good point. Start from seed. We were talking about that earlier. I don't know if you were on here then, but about how that's like how you can really create some awesome varieties potentially by growing apple from seed.
Oh, hey, Jason. Yeah. Start from Seed. If you guys haven't checked out Start from Seed, great channel.
Yeah.
Also up in the northern, he's up in Ontario, I believe. So
yeah. Somebody post a link to that channel. We're loving connecting with Jason. He's funny and doing a lot of cool stuff in his climate. Ontario, right? Is that what you were saying?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like so connected with the people in Ontario because it's really close to here. I mean, I'm sure you kind of feel the same way, Morgan. It's like a lot closer than down south. I feel like, oh, I can understand your climate and what you're doing up there, even though it's technically a different country. Okay, cool. And you guys,
I'm curious, what trees did you order?
Me?
Yeah.
Let me see. Let me show you.
All right.
I just got to pull up the email. It was a lot. So I spent $750 and I ordered from Fedco.
Yep.
You probably know them. They're in Maine. So I ordered from Fedco off of a recommendation from my friend Hannah, And I found a lot of the same varieties as I had already searched at another company, and they were a little bit less, like just a few dollars less expensive. And I'd already kind of researched the varieties that I was ordering a little bit. So let me just pull up the order summary if I can find it. Okay, I don't know if I want to share this because I feel like there's a risk of credit card information being shared. But
don't do that. That's not a good thing.
You can just read it off.
Yeah, just tell us.
Milden apples, Honeycrisp apples, Milden apples, and this is just like one of each. A certain kind of European pear that I'd researched, an Asian pear, sweet cherries, a couple different varieties, Red Haven peaches, another peach, a couple different type of plum trees, black ice and Cocheco. A lot of fruit trees because I love fruit. So raspberries, some that are everbearing and some that are summer bearing, and then blackberries, a couple different type of high bush blueberries. Oh, kiwis, which I'm super excited about. Those hardy kiwis.
I've got those
be careful there. So that's one of those ones. It can, especially where you are, like it can grow and then grow and spread everywhere. And so just be careful with it.
Where do you plant it then? In a big open space?
No, just keep mowed around it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Prune it as you go.
I'm really excited about the idea though of creating these. Like you can't buy this stuff at the store. You can't find it. You can't find it anywhere. And I didn't even know it existed until a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm super excited about that. Hazelnuts, 3 hazelnut trees, American hazelnut seedlings, smaller, they're not super big. And this other kind of cherries that were so weird. They're called Pioneer Cornelian cherries. Have you heard of those?
Yeah, they're good.
They're like elongated.
Yeah.
They look like a little
footballs. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Cherries do super well in New York, like amazingly well. And apparently so do hazelnut trees. Since we are plant-based, I'm trying to find a way to produce as much of what we eat. And so nuts and fruit and vegetables is like, and legumes and all that, like that's just going to create such a balanced diet. So really trying to do that. Plus I love sweet fruit. So that's where I'm getting the cherries and the peaches and the pears and the apples.
Cool. That's a good mix. Yeah. So what are you thinking about your plans for maintenance there?
I think, okay, so I'm sure you've seen the documentary, the Back to Eden documentary. I'm thinking of doing that kind of style, like for at least a lot of the things, to have like a kind of a block where it's just mulched with wood chips pretty heavily. And that is just because we have a lot of access to wood chips here, and also because I think we get a lot of rain too, but there are times where we get some weeks of drought and stuff. So I think that will be helpful for retention of water and the weed. I don't want to have like as much lawn as we do. So as much as we can decrease our lawn and mowing, like Chris is all about that. He's like, I love if we can just get rid of the grass.
Well, no, that's key. The wood chips are probably the single biggest resource that I find that we consume here. Like, I do twice a year mulching. So like every May and then every October, just try to mulch every single tree and around every single tree. It helps, to your point, in terms of weed suppression. It helps in terms of water retention. Yeah. And then it also helps, and this is the biggest thing you're going to have to look for too, is rodents. Mm-hmm. Particularly voles, but also field mice, other things can get in there too. They love the tall grass, they love the weeds, and so to kind of have that wood chips, they don't like the wood chips, and so that helps a lot.
Yeah, and I'm hoping our barn cats help too.
Yes.
But
something to help prevent the voles and moles from eating your tree roots is to plant daffodil bulbs. Do it when they're baby plants because it's easier to dig and plant them when they're small. Plant daffodil bulbs all the way around in circle. If you look at old homesteads and old orchards, you'll see daffodils growing all the way around all of the fruit trees, and that's because they do not want to eat nobody will eat daffodil bulbs.
Oh wow, I got to do that. That's awesome.
And it looks beautiful. I had an orchard at my old job that I took care of, and that's what we did there, and resolved the problem like instantly. Within a year, there was no more damage on the roots from the moles.
And hey, it's a good life. Natalie asked about wood chips, you know, really stripping the soil of, or in her situation, she had nutrient deficiencies with her crops from them. From what I know about, I'm not gonna deal with that. Someone else will deal with that. But from what I've learned about wood chips is, one, they're not going to be best the first year. They're going to be best over time. And the second thing is that I'm sure your climate can really dictate how they do. If you have a really don't get a lot of rain, I don't know. I mean, we get a lot of rain, so that compost tea, it creates like a compost tea, so it's putting back nutrients into the soil that are coming from the wood chips. I imagine if you don't get as much water, and if you're using raised beds, which doesn't retain water as well, then you might not have as much of that cycle happening.
The thing with wood chips is as wood chips break down, they use nitrogen. So if you take your wood chips and mix them into your soil, they're going to rob nitrogen from your soil. If you place them on top, they're only going to be touching that top thin layer of soil and only be able to reach that thin layer of nitrogen, and they won't impact your nutrition any further below that. Also, another thing that you can do is to take some blood meal or other nitrogen rich, if you have chickens, and sprinkle some of that on top of the wood chips to feed that nitrogen so that they don't rob it from your soil. But it's mainly when you mix the wood chips into your soil that it causes a deficiency. So you should never try to mix the wood chips in. They should always be in a nice thick layer on top.
Yeah. And you don't want the ones that are really, really big. Like if you can find a company that's breaking them down like finer pieces, I don't know if this is making sense, but if you can see a big difference between like the bigger, like larger, almost like sticks, and then like the finer wood chips where it's like you see leaves in there, and you see, I have heard of people when they're getting them from like a city dump or something like that, or municipality having more issues. I don't know, or in an urban environment, I don't know what kinds of trees they're breaking up, or I'm sure it's different from where you get them from. And
yeah, big. I've got a buddy, my buddy Alfred, and he has a stump grinding business in the summer, and so he's always looking for a place to dump his stump grindings, and so I just bring them on down, man. And so it's cultivate those relationships, because relationships that bring wood chips are good relationships.
My friend over at Bobblehead Homestead has another good tip for those of you that are reading the live chat. Go ahead and read his little tip.
So funny. Wood chips are great. Sorry, what did you say, Rose?
I was saying, his tip works with the high nitrogen.
It does.
Or if you have like rabbits or something else, and you're like, I just take the rabbit waste, which is urine and poop and a little bit of like pine dust. I just dump it right in the garden.
Yeah.
So, we'll see how it goes. But I had another thought, and I'm forgetting. Oh, you know what I noticed? So this year, we were strapped for time. I didn't know anything about gardening. I was just like, I'm going to plant all these things. Before YouTube, before any information was absorbed, I planted a garden, and we tilled, and it was, just classic what a gardener would do is you till up and whatever. So I tilled, and then I mulched really heavily around the tomatoes, and every other area except for the tomatoes was like completely dry by the end of the season. It was dry. It was awful. Did not look good. But by the tomatoes, when I, pulled out the tomatoes, so the soil was still really rich. And I think it was from that mulch and that heavy mulching with the straw, and there was tons of worms in there. And it was just like really impressive to me, because I had watched the Back to Eden documentary, and I, learned about mulch, the importance of mulch and all of that, but I hadn't seen it do anything until the end of the season, when I saw all those worms and all of that rich, moist soil that had been protected by that cover, which was cool.
Yeah. Actually, by the way, as we're talking, I realized as we were talking about pests and how to manage them, the other thing that I've actually been using that makes a huge difference are tree tubes. So what you can do is you can actually order and get them relatively inexpensively, depending on how many in a quantity, somewhere in the neighborhood between like $3 and $6 or $7 per tree tube. You can get like these translucent kind that let about 90% of the light in, but you can also push them down into the base, which can prevent voles from getting in there. You can get them as tall as like 6 feet, which will help you in terms of deer pressure too. And so for people who are out there trying to start an orchard, I would strongly encourage you to invest in tree tubes. I've tree tube every chestnut tree that we have, every butternut, every mulberry, pretty much those. I've let the apple and the black locust be the ones that the deer can just go after if they want to, which is sort of like a sacrifice approach. But I've found such good success with these tree tubes, and they've been great. The ones I got came from a company called Tree Pro. They have a product called the Miracle Tube. It's awesome. Highly recommend it. I've got like still a stash of a couple hundred sitting in our barn right now just because I keep using them. But they're great. I think I even put out a video at some point if people want to see it of how you have to install them and what you have to do. But they're really good. And just, for on the topic of orchard, I'd recommend them.
If somebody has that link, you can feel free to host it. That would be so interesting. I feel like these are things like I don't know. It's so hard to find, in my experience. I'm sure people have lots of resources, but it's hard to find resources on having a backyard orchard, like at a small scale, organically, heirloom, all of that. I just feel like it was really hard for me knowing where to get them and how much you should plant. And then there's like whether they're self-pollinating or they need to be pollinated by each other, or you need to pollinate with a different variety that blooms at the same time of year. And I mean, this is all, it's not easy to access this kind of information, especially for somebody who's just getting a homestead and it's like, I need to plant my orchard because everyone's telling me to plant an orchard first, but I have no clue what to do.
That was one of the things that Ison's nursery really helped me with the whole knowing when things bloom and to make sure I had the right cross pollinators. That they just answered my questions so quickly. It was very helpful if you find a good nursery that's going to sit and talk with you about what you're picking out. That really makes a big difference. If it's a smaller nursery, they will do that. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Everybody should get a tree coach. Getting into this stuff it's not easy, and sort of the choices you make now, you live with for years and years to come. And so, don't be shy for asking for advice and having somebody who can give you some of that, because it's just
Morgan, do you have a tree coach?
Oh, I do. I definitely do. My buddy Akiva Silver over at Twisted Tree. Like
a tree?
Yeah.
Maybe he can be my tree coach too.
Maybe you go on down there and ask him.
Yeah. No, I think mentorship is so important, and it's just, I think we live in a very isolated society now. Everyone does their own thing and tries to do it on their own and access internet and whatever. But there are certain things. What are you doing? There are certain things that you just can't absorb information well enough online. Puppy, yes, puppy.
Well, and the thing too is, it's not about looking up how to do one thing or how to do another thing, but as you do more and more of this stuff, what I'm finding is it's about how different things interact with each other, and how one principle plays with another principle, which plays with another principle, and how it creates the situation that you're in. And so you're not going to find that by going to look for the quick answer on that one specific thing. It's more, how do you apply these different concepts together?
So, what were you going to say, Rose?
I found a lot of information through some of the permaculture groups on Facebook for me with my permaculture goal. It's definitely been helpful for me and my mom. I mean, my mom has a tiny little lot in Massachusetts, and it's packed full of food, wall to wall. You can't go through her yard anywhere and find a blade of grass unless it accidentally got dropped by one of her chickens. And it's literally just all planted. And she's got so many fruit trees in there and so many fruit bushes and vines and ground covers. And it's just intermixed with all of her flowers and her chickens. I mean, it's just incredible what you can do in a small space.
Yes, I totally agree.
She has a Facebook page. It's called Grammy's Potager. If anybody wants to check her out, and she doesn't really do YouTube, but there's a video on there of her walking through her permaculture garden that I grew up in. So it'd be
cool.
kind of cool for you guys.
I gotta check that out.
Grammy's Potager.
Grammy's.
Yeah, she moved in when I was born, so when she was right before I was born. So it's literally where I grew up, and you can see her making this.
Tour of her yard.
She has a wealth of knowledge, and she shares a lot of great information about permaculture orchards and stuff on her Facebook page.
Okay, so we have tips. Join Facebook groups for permaculture. Find a tree. What was it? Tree coach. Find a tree coach. And learn from doing what you were saying, Morgan. You just kind of learn. You see how things interact. I think that's like my lesson. My first lesson of the year is balance. My second lesson of the year is intuitive learning. Like learn by doing, like by experiencing. And I think homesteading is definitely like you can learn in a book, but it's not the same.
And you know, I'll throw one more onto your list. Don't be afraid to fail, because you will.
Yeah.
I have murdered probably a couple hundred trees now at this point, and that's fine. I have I tried to plant a whole bunch of hazelnuts. That's been a complete failure for me. And so just know that happens, and it's just a matter of, kind of picking yourself up, figure out what you did wrong, and try again, because that will happen, like guaranteed. And just accept it and embrace it, and embrace what you're going to learn from it, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I think I probably lost half of those $650 worth of plants that I put in the first year, and mainly because of deer. So that's a big part of the reason, not just because that area isn't really used by us a lot, so we don't visit it often. So I feel like we're not gonna get as much out of it, but because we've put a fence around our vegetable garden for deer reasons. So now we can plant the trees in there and keep them protected. So definitely lessons to be learned in killing plants.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to ask, so I have these trees, right? And I don't have a plan for planting them right now. I mentioned the mulching a certain area, but what makes it permaculture? Like, is it like if I just took all my trees and I just planted, like did that thing where you have like XYZ, XYZ, XYZ or something and just didn't change the like landscape, would that make it permaculture? Or is there something else I need to do? Or is there something else I don't need to do? I'm just curious.
It's a good question. I mean, it's really, if you plant just a straight row of apple trees or just a straight row of pear trees, I wouldn't necessarily consider that a permaculture orchard, unless you were planting things. Maybe the next year you're going to plant things underneath and in between that fit in between and fit underneath. So for me, when I did the orchard over there, I still considered it permaculture, because when I planted, I did my tallest things. I did do it in rows because I was worried that the landlord was going to be like, what is this mess if I planted it the way I wanted to. So I did a row of the tallest trees, and then I did the next row was my shorter trees, and the next was, and this was kind of on a slope too. So in the bottom where the water runs off the most and it starts to level out, and there's actually a runoff creek right near there, that's where I planted my pawpaw. So paying attention to what your land is telling you. So if you have a slope, you're going to want to take that into consideration in your planting. And maybe you might want to curve around that slope as you plant to just kind of break things up and not make it. You might not do a straight line, but you might do a straight line and still be considered permaculture. So it really depends on what you're doing and what your land is telling you to do.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to think about here is, with permaculture, right? It's all about mimicking nature and creating a system that is requiring as few inputs as possible on an ongoing basis, and has several plants that are working together and interacting. And so, for Jen, for you, as you're describing, you've got a handful of apple trees and pear and cherry and plum and kind of these trees in the mix. It's more about thinking about what other plants do you want to surround them with so that they work together. how are you bringing up nutrients into the soil around those trees? How are you making sure that you're not just bunching all the same things together so that you're going to have a pest problem? You know, it's think about that. And I think to Rose's point too, it's think about the lay of the land and sort of where are your pools of water and what happens there. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to hydrate your trees nearly as much and they can get good growth naturally. That in my eyes is what, you know, would make it sort of a permaculture orchard. It's not about having a planting pattern. That's not what it's more about thinking about how do the trees interact with each other? How do they interact with the rest of the landscape? What else can you add into the mix to help it all work together as like one little ecosystem for you?
Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool. I'm going to have to brainstorm that some more. It's so much to, like, when there's so many different trees, it's like, how do I arrange these? But we'll see. I'll learn as I go. Maybe it won't be perfect permaculture, but we'll see. Okay. Well, I wanted to keep this at an hour so that I could eat dinner and that you guys could not be exhausted by us after a whole hour with us.
Like I said, I could talk trees for hours and hours and hours. So yeah, no, this was fun.
Yeah,
I know.
Great conversation.
Yeah, and I feel like I have a whole note sheet. It's not very organized, but I took a lot of notes. So I'm excited. Maybe I'll make a little infographic about this because I think that this would be a really cool blog post and just continuing to have this conversations to help people getting in. And then also the resources that you shared were really awesome. So I know Chris has like 20 tabs open on his computer right now.
I have a video that I put out today about starting a food forest on the cheap for anybody that's interested in finding out more information about how I'm getting some cuttings and seeds for free or for barter. Then feel free to check that out as well. Hopefully.
Yeah, someone post it in the chat before we wrap up.
And I've got a whole bunch of stuff on how I'm starting chestnuts in a bucket to the whole experiment to just seeing our whole orchard design and what that looks like if people are interested too.
Yeah, definitely make sure you guys, I'm sure you're already all subscribed to these two wonderful channels, but if you're not, definitely subscribe so you can see what they're doing with their orchard. They have way more information than I have. I'm a total newbie. And thank you to my sweet moderator friends for being awesome and keeping the conversation moving. You guys rock, and definitely check out those channels. New moderator tonight, our Organic Life. Tiffany has been a rock star commenter this past couple of days. She's gone through and watched all the videos and been leaving really, really sweet comments. And they have an awesome little homestead in Florida. It's gorgeous, and I'm jealous of that green grass all year long. So definitely check them out. And then my friend Hannah and Dan, they're in Maine. They have a channel, but there's no videos yet. But you can subscribe now so you see them when they come up. And the city said, Josh, and of course, Forgotten Wheat Farms and Hey, It's a Good Life. So thanks, guys. Really grateful for you. Thanks to my wonderful co-hosts for the night. And I'm excited to share more about our orchard with you guys in the future.
Look forward to seeing it. See ya.
Bye, guys.